Welcome to Knit, Design, Edit, Sleep, Repeat with Lisa Conway and Denise Finley. Let's listen in and see what's happening, who's happening, and what's new in their world.
Today we're talking with Nathan Taylor, the Sockmatician. We talk about his design story and inspirations, how he fell into teaching, and his love of innovation. I truly believe if it can be done, Nathan will find a way to do it, and he will inspire us all as he goes.
Hey guys, how are you today?
I am well. How about you, Nathan?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm very pleased to be here and very happy to be a guest on a new emerging podcast that I'm very excited about. So this is going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yay!
Yeah, we're really excited to have you as our very first guest. It's totally awesome.
That feels like such an accolade that makes me feel very, very happy, very nervous, very hopeful that I'm going to provide the kind of content and entertainment that you require.
No nervous.
I have no qualms whatsoever because you know how to perform.
I know how to talk. That is true.
So let's go ahead and get into our questions, Denise.
Well, I think one of the things that we love to hear from some of the designers going forward, since you're the first, Nathan, is their design story. So I'm going to ask just two questions,
Yep.
And I would like you to just fill in the blanks, whatever you have to say. And I'm excited to be here too. I really think that this is going to be so much fun, Nathan.
Thank you.
So here's the questions. When and why did you start designing? I mean, they're a very valid question.
By accident, and it was never meant to happen. So I guess even before I answer that question, I'm a musical theatre performer by trade. Knitting is not something that I ever sort of focused my time on in a deliberate way. Everything that's happened to me in the designing sense has been very much left to serendipity and chance. And I can sort of give you a bit of the history about that if you think that's interesting. And the when is quite easy. I started designing. Well, I say it's easy. I haven't actually checked my facts. Probably about 8-9 years ago, maybe something like that. Maybe 10 years ago. Maybe 2001. Sorry, 2011.
It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be exact.
Something like that. And I'm 47, so I came to this quite late. And the why was. Well, it's sort of linked to why I started knitting. So I learnt to knit as a child. My sister was given a kit to knit a stuffed toy of the Pink Panther. And of course, being the younger brother, I was 2.5 years younger than my sister. I always wanted to do everything that she did. I had my hands in it, all over everything because she was my leading light and my inspiration for many things, and still is. I'm very enormously fond of my sister, and she's a remarkable woman.
Aww.
And so that all started off very early, and I wanted to do what she did, but unfortunately, as you know, with these kits, there's only enough needles and yarn for one stuffed toy. So my mother, I was obviously devastated by this. My mother, who can knit but doesn't, she doesn't enjoy knitting, although she forced herself to do some baby jackets when we were born, because it was the early 70s, and that's what you had to do to prove that you were a real mother. And so she did. So she had under the stairs, there was this sort of big Tupperware, like an ice cream tub really, which had some old scrag ends of yarn in it and some mismatched assorted needles. And she found me, I would guess that this kit was designed and made for DK weight yarn, so probably a 4mm needle. She found me some, I think maybe 5 or 6mm needles and some lace weight green yarn. It was dark green, nothing like the Pink Panther at all. And I proceeded at the age of about 8, probably with a lot of help, I don't really remember, but to knit a large dark green string vest version of the Pink Panther. And I still have him today. I know this is... I'm not going to show him to you because this is an audio podcast, not video, but I still have him. He's sitting just over there, and you can see there's more holes than surface area, and you can see much more of the white stuffing showing through his skin than you can actually the knitted stitches itself. But he is quite recognisably a Pink Panther, even though he's dark green. So go on, Lisa.
For viewers that want to see it, Nathan, would you send me a copy of a photo?
Oh, I will.
So that I can put it in the show notes.
Well, if we're doing that, I can at least
that would
show,
be awesome.
So at least Denise can see him. There he is.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Maybe he's just green with envy or something, you know. Excellent.
Because he's dark green, it doesn't stop him from being the Pink Panther. But no, I'm very, very proud of him. And I'm very proud of his little he's got little embroidered eyes. He's very, very cute.
I like his eyes.
I know. He's nearly 40 years old. Cut to about 10 years ago, and I hadn't knitted anything since then. My two good friends of mine, Julie and Sam, and I know Sam can be a non-gender specific name, but this Sam happens to be male, both knitters, and both keen knitters, and were saying to me, Nathan, I think you should start knitting. And I was like, don't want to. Did that when I was 8, did it, moved on. Besides, I said... my brain is logic and maths and science, and knitting is all fluffy, cuddly expressions. And I know. You know, forgive me. I did not know what I said. And they said, but actually, Nathan, knitting is maths and logic and science. It's engineering in 3 dimensions from 2 dimensions, and all the rest of blah blah blah. After about 6 months of bullying, they actually said to me, okay, well, why don't you learn how to knit a sock? And the reason why they went for a sock was because I had this theory that men have a less comfortable relationship with hand knit items than women do generally. And I couldn't think of anything that I wanted to knit that I might want to actually wear. And so Sam, a male knitter, said, well, what about a sock? He said, a sock it's either in your shoe, it can just be a little expression of individuality hidden by a cloak of conformity, if necessary. Not that that's ever bothered me at all, sitting here with my mohawk and my 5mm nose ring. And I was like, okay. And he also said, the thing about socks is they are little microcosms of lots of different techniques, because obviously a foot is a very unusual shaped thing to be able to wrap a 2-dimensional surface around. So I said, okay, teach me how to knit a sock. And he did something brilliant. Rather than give me a pattern and teach me how to read the pattern, he taught me the structure, the engineering of a classic vanilla, classic vanilla top-down heel flap and gusset construction sock. So rather than say, follow these instructions, he said, do this until you get to this point. At this point, you have to do this because this is what's needed next. And at this point, you turn a heel and then you pick up stitches for it. And this is how you create a sock. So he taught me the geography, or as I like to call it, the gisography of a sock. And I'm really pleased he did that, because if he had just shown me a book with a pattern in that I liked and he said, knit that, just as with my dark green Pink Panther, I may have said, okay, I've done that now, thank you very much, I enjoyed that, now I'll move on to the next challenge. But actually, he gave me an understanding of the creative processes involved in how to make a sock like that, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought I had an understanding of it from the inside rather than just follow these instructions. I felt that I owned that information. It wasn't just second-hand received information. It was now my information that I could choose to do things with. The next stage of that was, I was looking through sock books thinking, oh, I like that sock. Which one do I want to make next? I like that one, but I don't like that bit. I'll turn the page. I like that sock, apart from that little detail. Turn the page. And I went through an entire book thinking, I like all of these except but for. So I thought, well, how about if I knitted one of these socks, but I put that aspect in it as well? And suddenly I was designing my own sock. And that that was the start of it all, really. That was when I really got the bug. And that's where the name Sockmatician comes from. That's because I don't really spend a great deal of time with socks anymore. I haven't knitted a sock for some years, but it'll always be where I started. And it will always be the sock that gave me the thirst and the inspiration and the will to do more with knitting. And so the designing thing really came from that. But when it first came for real, I swear to you, if I'd been Hatmatician, we would not be having this conversation, because Hatmatician would have made a hat, and then he might have moved on and made another hat. He would never have put it up online. The only reason I put my first pattern up online was because a sock requires two, and if you're making a second one, you need to take notes as you make the first one, so that you can make the second one from the notes. And by that point, I had written up the notes for the first sock that I ever designed and thought, well, that's basically a pattern. So if I like this sock, I wonder if anybody else will like this sock. So I stuck it up on Ravelry, and here we are today, 10 years later.
That's exciting. That is such an exciting process.
It's a pretty amazing story, really, when you think about it. But it leads to a thought in my head, Nathan. Do you always design for yourself, or do you ever design for others?
Oh gosh, that's an in-depth one. That is. I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that. I think I always design what I like, whether or not it's specifically for me or not as an item that I will wear. Yes, there's not a. I don't think there's a single thing that I have designed with certain caveats that I have then gone on to make that I wouldn't actually wear myself, be that shawls, be it hats, be it scarves, be it socks, be it cowls, gloves, wraps, all kinds of stuff like that, because I design what I like, because I have my aesthetic. I know that if I'm excited enough about an idea or an inspiration to want to make it in the first place, I obviously like it enough to want to wear it. The caveat I just mentioned was if the very few occasions that I've designed for magazine publication, particularly where it's a design to a brief, which is not necessarily coming from me to start with. I've only done that with a handful of items, really. Some of them, I still managed to make them into things that I would like. Some of them are like, this was for the magazine, this wasn't for me. But that's a very rare thing. And now I don't work towards magazines. I don't actually like the process of designing to someone else's brief. So it's much more all about what comes from me because of what I like.
Yeah, that's designing for that little thought that you've had, that creative inspiration that you've found, seems to be what I see when I look at your patterns. There's always something unique and new and different and innovative. And that seems to be where your brain goes.
It definitely is. I think, then you get into the whole argument of gendered knitting, and not just the pursuit of knitting itself, but the things that you can make. And I'm aware that I'm a man, and I'm sort of 1 in 10 knitters are men, it seems, certainly from the analytics that I see on Ravelry and YouTube and on my Instagram and stuff like that. And I have to acknowledge that of the people that follow me, I probably have a slightly higher proportion of male knitters than most people would find on their feeds, because they flock to me because I am a male knitter. So maybe 9% of the knitters out there, it seems, are male. And so am I trying to design male stuff? Nah, I'm really not. I'm just trying to design the stuff that I like. And I like, sometimes I like lacy things, and sometimes I'll wear lacy things. And that's, I guess I always design for my aesthetic, and I am a man, but I'm this kind of man. I'm this kind of man who sometimes goes out in drag, and I'm the kind of man who is gay and married with a husband, but I'm also not the kind of gay man who is particularly effeminate or particularly hypermasculine. I'm just this Nathan-shaped person, and this Nathan-shaped person designs knitting for this Nathan-shaped person's likes, and that's that. And I think some people really like that, and some people like the sort of the neutrality of that. but I don't even try for neutrality, if you see what I mean, with my designs. I did at one stage have an ethos where I was trying to deliberately put a masculine twist on the things that were specifically considered to be hyper feminine. Like beads and lace seem to be at that end of the spectrum. Whatever terms we're using when we say feminine, whatever we mean by that, whatever society imposes on us, and all the caveats that go along with that. But lace and beading seem to be at the more feminine end of the spectrum, it would appear to me. And so I tried to think, well, what can you do to sort of get around that? You could just say, no, I like the pretty beaded things, and that's okay. Or what I was trying to do was sort of supersize them so that it wouldn't have to be a certain type of man who would like those things, but it could appeal to a more masculine aesthetic. So I supersized the lace and did it in chunky yarn, and I put massive, great big wooden beads on a big chunky cowl. And that, I guess, was a deliberate attempt to try and subvert those conformist norms. But I don't normally do that. That was just sort of a little brief period of my design life.
Did you find those designs were successful? Did they?
That's what I was going to ask.
Nobody cared. And actually,
Okay.
of the people who made them, the cowl was pretty modern. Listen, I don't make a lot of money out of knitting, so it's hard to judge what successful means. But even by my standards, they weren't some of my most successful patterns, and I guess most of them were bought by women. But that may have been, well, I'll make this for the man in my life, or it may be bought by women who also don't conform to those stereotypical feminine ideals. And not that there's any bad thing about conforming to those stereotypical feminine ideals either. What I love is the fact that in knitting there's something for everyone, wherever you fit on any spectrum of any kind of ability, taste, aesthetic, whatever it is, there's something in knitting there for you, and that's great. And I think the best thing I can do as a designer is to stay true to what I like, because someone else is doing the other stuff. There's everything else is covered by somebody else. So I do what I do, and I hope I do it as well as I can.
Well, Nathan, that actually, you just segued into my question.
Fabulous.
How smart are you? The question is, if you knit other people's designs, and if you do, why? And if you don't, why not?
I don't, and that's purely and simply because I don't have time. My knitting time is all taken up with the stuff that I'm doing for me. I've got used to doing things in a certain way. I have, for example, because I fell into this so accidentally and thankfully became quite well known quite quickly, I've never really been an experienced knitter of other people's designs anyway. I think I had knitted one pair of vanilla socks, not from a design, before I designed my own first designed pair of socks, my own pattern. So all of the things that I've done since have pretty much been coming out of this head of mine, and that just takes up the time. It's occasionally I have thought, oh, that's absolutely beautiful, and I do love other people's. I do absolutely love other people's work, and I'm inspired by people because other people, as I just said, I do what I do well, but other people do what they do well so much better than I ever could, and that's really, really inspiring because I don't have their head. I mean, I have certain designers who I revere and pedestalize and just think, well, these people are my heroes. And I would love to have the time to knit their stuff, but you've got to keep churning stuff out, and knitting's not a quick game by any stretch. So all of my time is taken up by doing stuff that I then want to turn into patterns to release. So sadly, I don't. But I do. I don't really know how most knitting patterns are written either. I've only got the help and support and guidance of my tech editor, who sometimes says, Nathan, this isn't how this stuff gets said. But this is the way it makes sense to me. And she says, yes, but do you really want to argue with centuries of tradition? It's like, I guess not.
I think there's something to be said for sometimes pushing the boundaries of hundreds of years of tradition.
I agree.
There are times as a tech editor that I see something and I think, oh, that's totally different and that's brilliant. And I think we should leave that in.
I think
That's interesting.
my relationship with my tech editor is, I mean, Lisa and I have off podcast, we've discussed this at length. I think the world of my tech editor, Michelle. She is absolutely brilliant, and I could not do what I do without her. She's been with me right from the very beginning, right from that first sock pattern when I wasn't even on Instagram, didn't even know Instagram was a thing. I had about 14 followers on Twitter. I said I hadn't heard of tech editing, but I knew that test knitting was a thing, and I just said, I've designed a sock pattern, would anybody like to test knit it and give me some feedback? I don't even know how she was following me in the first place at that point, but Michelle was the first person that got back to me and said, I'd like to. So I sent it to her, and 10 years on, we are firm friends, and she has been with me all the way. She tech edited my first book, she's tech editing my second book, which is coming out soon, and we backwards and forwards about certain things. She'll always defer to my final word, but I don't think she realises quite how often I defer to her good sense.
I love that story about how long you've been with her and how you've evolved that way for your own designs. I think that's excellent. And you make a very valid point about time. I mean, there's not enough hours in a day for many people, for most people.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very valid point.
Try being a tech editor that sees all these wonderful patterns come across your desk and know that you just don't have time to knit them all. Believe me, I have more than one client that sends me a pattern and I think, oh, I want to make that. Yeah, when?
You have to give up sleeping, Lisa. You have to give up sleeping, okay?
I think that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily go looking. I don't sort of spend a lot of time trawling through patterns on Ravelry or Instagram and stuff like that, for various reasons. I don't like spending too much time online anyway, but I know that the life, the cues, the inspiration is great. I'm part of me is a bit scared of stealing someone else's ideas by mistake. And I don't want to sort of, yes, I want to be influenced by people who I think are wonderful, but I don't want to see something, forget I've seen it, regurgitate it in one of my patterns, and then go, oh, later on that wasn't my idea, that wasn't my work. So maybe one of the things that you were talking about, Lisa, is sort of, you know, my sort of design voice, I guess. Maybe that's because I do almost deliberately sequester myself from the rest of the designing world.
Well, Nathan, I'm going to throw this out there. A shameless plug for the podcast here. In a couple of weeks after your episode is released, we will be releasing an episode with Denise's husband, Randy, who is a former intellectual property attorney. And you really need to listen.
I really do.
You really need to listen, because it was very enlightening. Even I thought I had pretty much covered the bases. No, not even close.
Just enlightening, yes, but also slightly terrifying, just in case I've been doing it wrong all this time.
So, Nathan, I'm going to kind of shift gears just a little bit. When and how did you start teaching? Because I know for a while there, teaching became a fairly big part of your knit story.
What some people may not know about me is that my design world life story has focused very, very much on the technique of double knitting. And for anyone who doesn't know what double knitting is a technique whereby you can create a two-sided fabric, usually, not always, in two colours, usually not always showing a stocking stitch on both sides, using the interplay of the two colours to create pictorial designs rather than textural designs. You can, of course, add texture and do all sorts of things in double knitting as well. Anything that can be done in single-face knitting can also be done in double knitting, but traditionally, and the standard form of double knitting, is just this two-colour pictorial graphic design element. So it means you can basically use your stitches as pixels on a picture to create any kind of design you like. Now, a lot of people find the idea of double knitting, many knitters have never heard of it, those that have, many of them would say, oh, that's hard, that's terrifying. And of those who've had a go, everyone will go, it's great, it's not as hard as you think. So I fell into double knitting very early on, actually, in my designing career. And I think double knitting is definitely what took me away from knitting socks. It was a rabbit hole that I fell down completely and utterly and fell in love. There's something about it. Have we got time for you to sort of go into that story a little bit?
Sure.
I was at a Monday afternoon knit and natter group at a local knitting shop, wool yarn shop, and I was there I was a beginner, and I was surrounded by all these sort of older ladies, and they were both wonderful and patronising to the young male knitter in their group. And I say that kindly. There was nothing deliberate about their patronisation. Oh, look at you! Aren't you clever with your clumsy man hands? It was terribly sweet and came from exactly the right place. But I was very much the odd one out. A lady walked in, and I was knitting my little vanilla sock, and she was wearing the most extraordinary cardigan. It was absolutely beautiful. It was sort of a big boxy square kimono type style shape, and it had all over it a cityscape in two colours, light and dark blue, I think they were. And it was a road going around the waist, and there were trees and skyscrapers and clouds, and it was absolutely brilliant. And then when she took it off and turned it inside out, you could see that the colours were reversed on the inside, and the inside looked as good as the outside, because she was a freaky evil genius, and she'd done all her seams so that everything was all beautiful and lovely. And the joy of it was that because of the colour she chose and because of the theme of it, the outside had the illusion that it was the city by day, and the inside had the illusion that it was the city by night. It was absolutely spectacular, and I was like,
wow.
Oh yeah, well that was exactly my jaw fell into my knitted sock, and I said to her, what is this crazy madness? And she said, it's called double knitting. And I said, and how do I learn this? She said, go home and look it up. She was in absolutely no hurry to teach me, but I'm really glad she didn't, because if she tried to say, well, you do this and you do this and you do this, I'd have, with my sort of very inexperienced brain, I'd have looked at her and gone, oh, okay, thank you very much, not really understanding it, but I would have known on some level that I'd been given the answer, so that would have satisfied my curiosity. But what she did was she sent me home with a quest and a thirst to learn more. And I fell down that rabbit hole big and hard and deep. And I spent 3 months not casting on any double knitting, but scouring the internet for any YouTube videos, any tutorials, anything, anywhere that I could find on the subject. And I've said this so many times to people before, but this is genuinely true. It's almost as if I knew, even then, before having done any, that this was going to be something that was going to matter in my life, and I wanted to get it right. I didn't want to risk learning it wrongly or less well, not as good as I could, so that if I tried it, it went wrong and I didn't like it. I knew I needed to get this right, and I knew I needed to check my sources and realize, do you know what, that lady, she does the tutorial slightly differently from him, and I think his is right, or hers is right, and his is wrong, or whatever. I needed to get to a point where I knew it all, as much as there is an all in knitting, and then I cast on my first double knitted project, which was a scarf that I designed myself. And so I think that then became my thing, and being a niche subject matter that not everyone knew about, I started to talk to people about it, say, look at this, and people would say, oh, these things are amazing, how do you do it? Well, I'll show you. And that became the beginning of the classes and the teaching. So I think it was definitely the fact that I fell into the double knitting rabbit hole that led me on to want to share that with people who didn't know about it. Because if I was doing lace and cables and established techniques that most knitters know how to do, there wouldn't have been a reason for me to start showing other people how to do it. But because double knitting was something a little bit more unusual, people wanted to learn about it, and they may not have known anybody else who knew how to do it in the first place, so they came to me, and it just grew from there, really. As well as the fact that I'm a bit of an actor, in my other life. So
no,
I know, right? So a class for me is was not just sitting down and learn these steps. The class for me has always been a bit of an experience, a bit of an exercise in clowning around, putting people at their ease so that I can get the best results from them by making myself look stupid at the beginning of the class and throughout, and all of those kind of things. Those tips and techniques and tricks that are psychological things that I've learned from my drama school training and from being in rehearsal rooms and stuff like that. I was able to bring those to my classes, and people seem to like it. And thankfully, there are now a lot more double knitters in the world than there used to be.
Which scarf are you referring to as your first?
My first one was a scarf pattern called Perplexus, which I don't have to hand, otherwise I'll show you, but I know this is not a video podcast, but I can send you a photograph of that. It has this sort of eye-popping optical illusion. It's made with what looks like a labyrinth of vertical and horizontal lines, but they turn corners in certain ways that it looks like it's got diamonds on it. There are no diamonds on it at all, but your eye creates diamonds where there aren't any. It's not to be looked at with a hangover.
So did that come from your knowledge of math?
I think it was my love of that sort of pattern and optical illusion is allied with my love of things numerical rather than my knowledge of maths. I think it's easier to say. I've always said I'm the magician part of Sockmatician is definitely for a mathematician, but I'm a mathematician by inclination, not by education.
Okay, great. Now, because that was your first set of classes you taught,
Yep.
was the double knitting, correct?
Yep.
What classes do you still teach?
I don't teach any classes anymore. I came at the short end of the stick of some of the cancel culture that's going on. I'm sure many people will know this already about me. So I don't teach classes publicly anymore, which is a real shame. I miss that in a way because I used to get so much gratification from bringing something out of people that wasn't necessarily the subject matter of the class. That I think that was always my speciality, was to give somebody in my class whatever it was they needed that day. That was my superpower if I had one, as well as having a lot of fun sharing the stuff that I have learnt, and because I've taken all the things that I've sort of thrown myself into, I've taken them a little bit further than they've been taken before and learnt new things. I used to teach a class called Knit Nerdism, which was probably one of my favourite classes to teach, which was really, really in-depth, proper, geeky, nerdy stuff about all the myths that we tell ourselves about knitting, all the untruths that we are told about knitting that we take on as fact, all of the things that we can do to make our knitting behave if we understand it on a fundamental, almost atomic level, where these mistakes are being made that cause discrepancies in tension and things like that. They're not always they're not always happening where you think they are. So an understanding of what's really going on in your knitting can really help you fix all that kind of stuff. I used to love teaching that class. But in a way, I'm also grateful that I don't do it anymore, because it was becoming a lot of pressure. I was going around the world. This sounds very ungrateful. This is not at all, be careful what you wish for. I'd worked very hard to build up the reputation I had, and I was delighted that people wanted to have me teach in Australia, New Zealand, San Francisco, New York, all over Europe. Those things were absolutely wonderful, but it was taking its toll on me, sort of from a mental health perspective, in ways I hadn't fully understood until it all came to a halt. And although it came to a halt not by my hand, it sort of gave me back certain things in my life that I didn't know I was missing out on. So it's the right balance now, I think.
I hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of things that have happened to a lot of us in this era in society. And I think some of it is taking stock of where we're at. Yeah. Lisa, did you have a question?
I do. I want to throw out here, but Nathan, if you are contacted, say by a guild or some place like that for like an online class, aren't you still available for those?
I am, yeah. I've certainly do. I started at the beginning of the pandemic. I started doing some Zoom classes. In fact, Lisa, you took two with me, didn't you? And we had great fun doing it. And sort of the one-to-one Zoom classes are great. I'd be very happy to do sort of more lecture-based things, like the Knit Nerdism class lends itself to being a lecture format. The double knitting is something I wouldn't really be comfortable doing in a big group, just because I'm a very hands-on teacher, and I need to make sure I can get round everyone and make sure see what they're all doing and make sure they're all doing it right, so that they all get the best the best outcome from the class. I don't want anyone to feel that they've been left behind or they didn't get what was going on, because I've always said my double knitting class for beginners was deliberately called Demystifying double knitting rather than beginners. And it was a case of untangling that fear that people have about something that looks this complicated, when actually it's a very, very simple prospect. And it was just the beginning. It was a jumping off point. It was a stepping stone to what I had with the lady with the cardigan. That was my stepping stone to wanting to know more. I always was my classes to be a stepping stone for people to want to know more, rather than the people that I call the serial workshop collectors, who are brilliant and they have a lovely time and they do that new thing and they go, oh, that was great. What am I doing next? I always wanted my class to go, that was brilliant. What can I do with it next? So that's not something I feel I would necessarily be able to get from Zoom. But if anybody is looking for a class on one-to-one across this format with me, then I'm very, very much open to that, definitely.
Well, this leads me to a two-parter, actually, because it seems to me that you spend most of your time now designing and knitting your designs, okay? So have you ever thought about, and this is a weird thing for me to say, but have you ever thought about not continuing to design?
Oh, I mean, yes. When things got a little bit sticky for me online, that was tough times for me, and I had to really think very hard and long about what I wanted my future in the knitting world to be. I'm still not sure I know the answer to that question, I have to say.
That's fair.
Yeah, I'm still not sure I know what I want my future in the knitting world to be. What I do know is that whatever it is, it's going to be on my terms, not on anyone else's. And that's really important to me, because I feel that I can dip in and take what makes me happy from it nowadays, rather than having to feel beholden to everyone else to see what's going to make them happy. And I think I was getting to that stage, which is not particularly a healthy place to be. So have I ever thought about continuing not to design, or not continuing to design? Yeah, sometimes. I enjoy the knitting. I will always design, but but to me, I guess what I'm talking about is the definition of what a designer is. A designer is just someone who makes stuff up. And there are lots of knitters who make stuff up, who don't then write it up or release it as a published pattern. That doesn't stop them from being a designer in my book. Absolutely not. Somebody who sees a pattern and makes modifications to suit them. And I'm not just talking about size and shape modifications, but they think, an aesthetic choice about even choosing the colours. That's design. That is design. And I will defend that viewpoint to my dying day. And I think a lot of people say, oh, I could never be a designer. But they are in every choice they make with their knitting. And so I probably, even if I were to say, right, that's it, I'm not doing any more in the knitting world, I'm not going to release any more patterns, I'm not doing any of that, I would still continue to knit, and I would still continue to knit things that came out of my head, even if I weren't putting them up online for people to buy. So I don't think it would be possible for me to stop designing on that level.
That's an excellent point.
Nathan, didn't you teach a class that was kind of along those same lines of how to take your ideas and run with them?
Yeah, it was. I only got the chance really to teach it 3, maybe 4 times, and it was called Patterning a Sock, and it was a class that was very specifically aimed at people who had some experience of sock knitting. So it wasn't a beginner's sock knitting class, but they may not have ever done any design work themselves. And there's always, like me, the reason I started designing was I couldn't find that perfect sock pattern that represented everything I wanted to make. I think everyone who knits socks is always in search of that one special pattern that covers every base, that is perfectly, exactly the right design that they have always wanted to make. And the purpose of the class was using my knowledge and tips and tricks and any expertise that I've picked up along the way to help bring that out of people. So the homework that people would bring to the class was, what inspires you? What do you want a sock to be? What construction are you looking for? What do you want to bring me photographs of your favourite architecture or things from nature? Stitch directories and dictionaries. What stitch textures do you love? And then together we would just ask questions. So for me in design, there's no such thing as a bad question. And the answer is always yes. That doesn't mean that the question and the answer is therefore the end of the road, because you think, okay, can you do circles in knitting? The answer is yes. But it leads to the next question is, well, how can we create these circles? Are we going to be doing it with colour? Are we going to be doing it with texture? Are we going to be doing it with cabling? Okay, so then out of those, okay, I'm going to choose cables. Well, do we want cables to be the circles, the main design? Are the circles just a small function feature somewhere else? How do we want to let this design flow? Are we going to start with the motif and work outwards? Are we going to start from the cuff and let everything flow down through the sock? Does the stitch pattern that you've got fit the numbers that will create the foot size that you need? If not, how can we fudge them? How can we sort of adapt it? Where can we put some negative space? Where can we expand the pattern? All of those sorts of things. So people would say, oh, but I really want to do a tree. Okay, where do you want your tree? What do you want the tree to look like? How do we do this? And so I would just fire questions back at them and get them to answer the question. And their answer would always spawn another question. And the only time you're ever done with asking the question spawned from the previous answer is when the design is on the page and ready to go. And all of those things really, really put everything together into a coherent pattern that people would say, oh, I could never have done that. It was like, but it all came from you. All I had to do was chip away at the puzzle piece and reveal what was in there for you. That was always really, really gratifying. I'd love to do more of that.
Well, I think, Nathan, from what I know of you, and we've known each other a couple years now, is that's the way you approach everything you do in knitting. It's that, oh, I want to do this. How do I get there? And all of those questions. And that's the way your brain works, which is one of the things I adore about you, because it's been an inspiration for me to examine how you express that creativity by asking questions. I love that.
There was a wonderful story that came out recently. I'm going to mangle some of the facts in this, but the kernel of the story is what matters. One of the most, in the last couple of years, there was a Nobel Prize winner, either in maths or physics, obviously top of his game, very, very bright man, who came from, and I can't remember exactly where, but somewhere in the developing world. Very, very humble beginnings, very, very underprivileged and very underprovided for start in life. And his mother, who was illiterate, who couldn't read or write and had no education at all, worked 4 jobs to be able to put her son through school. Obviously, this woman, her son and furtherance of his life was her prime goal. And yet, while he was educating himself, she had no way of communicating with him on the level as a peer. But he said in his acceptance speech, he dedicated his prize to his mother, because every day when he got home from school, she would always say to him, "Did you ask any good questions today?" And that is, to me, one of the most beautiful stories in the world.
I love it. I will have to find out who this person was.
Yeah, I should do the research, but that was the story. Did you ask any good questions today? Because it didn't matter. Didn't matter that she couldn't understand anything he was going to say back. She was just instilling in him the idea that you have to go out there and you have to ask.
Yeah, and that's great. I love it. So, Nathan, what can our listeners expect from you in the near future?
For the last 2 years, I have been working on my second book. My first book, Guys Knit, is a beginner's knitting manual aimed at people who've never picked up knitting needles before, or did when they were children but would like a little refresher as adults. That was such a surprise to me to write that book. I was approached about that one by the publishers and said blithely, yes, I'll do that, thinking, I've never taught someone how to knit from scratch. I don't know how to do it. But that's a whole other story. That book was out in 2018, and copies are still available from my website, sockmatician.com. Thank you very much. But the second book is much more my wheelhouse, if you like. It's an advanced niche technique. It's a technique that I have, I guess, invented, pioneered, certainly developed myself over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe more. And that is the concept of double knitted brioche. So brioche is obviously the wunderkind stitch of the millennium, has taken root and flourished everywhere like Japanese knotweed over the last 20 years or so, furthered by people like Nancy Marchant and Stephen West, who've really, really brought it to the public attention. And it's this extraordinarily structural, textured, engineered structure of fabric. I like the stuff made with 2 colours. It can be made with 1, but I like the stuff made with 2. It creates these wonderful ridges and hollows in your knitting with vertical stripes, which is kind of unusual in knitting. And yet there were things about ordinary brioche that I, as a lazy perfectionist, didn't like. I didn't like the fact, this is the lazy part, I didn't like the fact that you have to work it in 2 passes. First one with 1 colour, knitting every other stitch and slipping all the ones in between, slipping all the stitches back, and then coming across with the second pass and working all the stitches that didn't get worked in the first round. I felt that was a little bit too much of a faff, and I wondered if it had to be that way. I also didn't like the fact, this is the perfectionist side of the lazy perfectionist, I didn't like the idea that the back doesn't look as nice as the front. So the increases and decreases that create the shapes and the patterning and the texture on the front don't match up quite on the back. They don't look awful, but they're not the same. And coming from a double knitting perspective, where the back and the front are absolute mirror negative images of each other, or at least can be, I started to think, well, I want that in brioche as well. So I started to fiddle about with seeing if I could come up with a way of working what I called 1 pass brioche at the time. And I thought for ages that I'd done it. I thought I'd come up with this way of working both yarns together, carrying them across, working every stitch in turn. Every stitch gets given a yarn over as you go, and there you've got brioche, but it's done in half the time. And then, through a long, complicated chain of events, and a chance comment by Nancy Marchant, who's one of my heroes in the field, I did some serious looking at this fabric that I'd created and realised it wasn't the same as brioche. Ostensibly, outwardly, it looked very similar, but the actual structure of how the yarns interplay with each other is subtly but very different. And at first I was devastated, thinking, I've put all this time and research into something and now it's not what I thought it was. And it was my husband, actually, who said, but Nathan, you've come up with something new. Doesn't that have validity on its own, and perhaps even more validity? And I thought, well, maybe it does. So double knitted brioche it takes all of its methodology and teachings from the double knitting world, which is why I've changed the name from 1 pass to double knitted brioche, because it is brioche, but it's a double knitted version of it, and it is something slightly different. So if I was saying it's 1 pass brioche, then it's more suggesting that I've created the same sort of fabric, but double knitted brioche allows it, as a title, allows it to be something different. So I've been working on that for 2 years. The book is in tech edit now. It's with Michelle. I've actually got 1 more chapter to write. I started it yesterday. I'm adding an extra chapter to the book, which I know Lisa's raised eyebrows. I'm adding a troubleshooting chapter to the book, which I've been equivocating about whether or not I should, but I really think that people need to know what to do if it goes wrong. So I'm writing a chapter on that. But that should be out in the next 2 to 3 months, and I'm really looking forward to unleashing that on the world, because I think it's a bit of a game changer. I really do. It's not just there for people who want to make the patterns that are in the book, or for other designers who might want to use the technique in the future, but there are ways of being able to translate all the wonderful myriad patterns out there already that are knitted for the traditional 2-pass method, and giving them the double knitted brioche treatment, so you can knit them in half the time and with 100% reversibility. So I think it has a lot of potential to be a really, really exciting new addition to the canon of knitting techniques. So that's mostly what I've been working on, and in the meantime I've been doing lots of other designs as well. So throughout this year I'm going to be just releasing a load of new designs with all sorts of other things. I've been working on triple knitting and 4-colour triple knitting and 4-colour triple knitted lace and multi-marled double knitting and garter stitch marled double knitting with cables, and all sorts of really, really exciting new techniques that have just been sort of spilling out of me in a really intensely creative period, which I'm incredibly excited about. I showed quite a lot of these on my most recent podcast episode on YouTube, and I'm flushing even at the thought, because I get very, very excited about sharing new things.
Well, so Nathan, I'm excited. I love brioche, but it's like you said, it's very time consuming, and it was getting on my nerves. I'm that kind of a person. I don't have a lot of time either. But do this for us right now, real quick, before Lisa asks the last question. Could you tell us where we find you at, or maybe your Instagram, anything like that?
Yeah,
whatever you feel comfortable to share.
Thank you. I'm Sockmatician everywhere, and I say everywhere, that's basically just Instagram and YouTube. So my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Sockmatician, and I've been a little bit absent from there while I've been writing the book, but I'm coming back now with more regular podcast episodes, and I just talk about the things that I do in my life, and I talk about the knitting innovations that I'm doing and the things that are happening in my knitting world. That's usually a lot of fun. And on Instagram, it's instagram.com/Sockmatician as well, and it's SOCKMATICIAN, like socks and mathematicians squished together.
And where would we buy one of your books?
Oh, so the sockmatician.com is where you can buy the books. I think they are available on Amazon, but I'm the only person in the world selling signed copies by the author.
Thank you.
I didn't want you to miss that sockmatician.com, because there are other things available on Nathan's website, like his absolutely gorgeous yarn.
No, it's lovely. It's a collaboration with Skeins Mill in New Zealand, and it's like 75% merino, about 15% black alpaca, and 10% possum. So it is. It's a really, really soft, warm yarn. The black alpaca gives the undyed colour of this lovely grey cast, so all of the dyeing goes over the top of that, and the grey of the yarn really unifies the palette really beautifully. It's incredibly soft. It is, I always get this wrong, Lisa, which is it, woolen spun or worsted spun, where there's lots of different processes and they all lie in the same way? All the fibres.
That's worsted.
That's worsted. It's a worsted spun yarn, so it's really, really strong. And both the possum and the alpaca fibres are both hollow, so there's great warmth and loveliness in there. And the possum, being a very, very short staple length, means that the yarn, after a little bit of wear, gets this lovely sort of greyish brown halo over it as the ends of the possum fibres make their way free. It really is absolutely glorious to work with. I love it.
I drool every time I think about it. Well, Nathan, we have one question we're going to ask each of our designers that we interview over time, because we are aimed at talking to other designers. And so my hope here is that we are an inspiration to them. So do you have any advice that you would give a person who is thinking about designing, or is a new designer, or just wants to test the waters?
I think I probably do, and I think it's something I touched on earlier. Just be true to your own self. Don't try to copy what anyone else is doing. Be inspired by other people, of course. Cherry pick stuff about what's going out there, but don't try and say, oh, that person's really successful, well, I'll try and do what they're doing. Don't do that. Be you. Do what you do. Don't follow trends, because if you're following a trend, you're already too late. That's where the word following comes in. You can lead by just being your best self and doing the things that you like and making the stuff that you want to knit. And you're not alone. If you want to knit it, there's a very good chance somebody else will want to as well. So it doesn't matter whether it's on trend. It doesn't matter if it's the modish stuff now in this season's colour. What matters is that you like it, and somebody else will too. And above all else, be tenacious. Be really, really tenacious. It's a saturated market out there. There's a lot of noise, and that's not said to put people off. It's just said to say, sometimes it can be hard to yell loudly enough to say, look over here, I'm here and I'm doing some good stuff. But just keep at it. Believe in what you do, because what you do is good.
Thank you so much, Nathan. We've loved having you here today. I know that people are going to take a lot of inspiration from this episode. So it means the world to me that you were willing to be here for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
It's
thank
been
you.
an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you, Denise, over this period as well. And really, really lovely to be part of this. And I wish you all the very best of success with this podcast as well. I think there's lots of video podcasts out there, but there's room for some more audio podcasts as well, I think, because people enjoy wrapping themselves up with their headphones and their best project. And what better way to enjoy that kind of afternoon in front of the fire or under the duvet than with somebody talking about stuff that you love. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe in your favorite podcast app, and join us for episode 3, where we talk about style sheets. So, just to wrap up, remember you can reach us through our Facebook or our Ravelry group, at our email at knitdesignedit@gmail.com. And if you would like to learn more about tech editing or grading or other services that I provide, please visit my website at arcticedits.com.
I've just realised I'm going to change my chair to one that doesn't creak.
I heard that noise. I did.
Yeah. There. It's all right. It's all good. It's all good. There we are.
Alan's recording this.
There we go.
No, unfortunately, I'm not.
Lisa, wouldn't that be funny? Oh my god.
Now,
How
listen
not
to
to
my desk.
record on Zoom. No.
I'm literally sitting on this.
I need you, Nathan, to make sure to send me a couple lines of bio.
Oh yes, of course. Have I not done that? Right. Yes.
And
literally, sort of what kind of length? Because I can go on, or I can do 2 lines, whatever you want.
you can go on and on for the show notes. Give me a full paragraph for the show notes.
Oh, that's your
and then
version of
I'll
on and
pull
on.
from that for the intro section.
I love you say you can go on and on. 1 full paragraph. Okay.
One paragraph, and you're like,
that's not
like a minute of my life, right?
That's not.